Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Hodge for Supervisor virtual town halls. We're grateful to have you here tuning in from Arizona, California, DC, or around the country. Thank you all for tuning in today. We have a very, very special guest with us, someone who I consider a very dear friend of mine and is a tremendous leader we have running the show here in the great state of Arizona. I'm introducing my dear friend, Secretary of State Katie Hobbs. Katie Hobbs earned her bachelor's degree in social work from Northern Arizona University and a master's degree in social work from Arizona State University. Hobbs has been a social worker since 1992, working on issues such as domestic violence, behavioral health, and homelessness. Hobbs is affiliated with the National Association of Social Workers and is an adjunct professor at the Paradise Valley Community Colleges. Hobbs was elected to the Arizona House of Representatives in 2010 and then was elected to the Arizona State Senate in 2012. Hobbs credits her interest in politics to Emerge Arizona, stating that she reluctantly applied to Emerge Arizona and by the end was ready to run for office. In the Senate, she served as the minority leader and was inspired to run for office by the people she assisted as a social worker, believing that they were not being heard by their government. Since she advocates for ending domestic violence, on March 8th, Hobbs filed to run for the Arizona Secretary of State. And ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you my dear friend, Katie Hobbs, our Secretary of State. Katie, thank you for joining us today.
Oops. Oh, thank you so much for having me. It helps if I know how to unmute the mic. You'd think I'd have this figured out by now. Thanks so much for having me. And wow, that's an old bio. I don't know where you found that, but yes, I did teach. I'm not teaching anymore because Secretary of State is a full-time job. And I'm just really happy to be here. We've been spending the last several weeks talking about how do we make our elections safer in this time of COVID-19. And so happy to talk about that here today as well. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Secretary Hobbs. We appreciate you taking the time to join us and bringing your wealth of knowledge. So let's kick things off. Let's talk about Katie before we talk about Secretary Hobbs. Tell us about you, a little bit more about your background. What are some of your favorite hobbies? What are some of the books that you're reading right now? Or how have you been spending your time during the quarantine?
Well, I've been really busy as Secretary of State. As I mentioned, we're focused on helping ensure our elections are safe and accessible for all Arizonans. Yeah, I enjoy hiking, so I've been trying to get out as much as possible, trying to avoid crowded trails, which is kind of hard to do right now. I also do triathlon, which there aren't going to be any races for the foreseeable future. So I'm still trying to keep in shape for that, for whenever races start back up again. And this is really terrible, but I'm actually not reading anything right now. I'm watching a lot of Netflix.
Well,
I just binged Dead to Me season 2, like all at once.
There is nothing wrong with that. I take it you have lots of material you're reading every day as it is. Oh my gosh! So it's I started watching The Ozarks, and I've fallen in love with that show. It's pretty incredible.
Oh. Yes, I also recently binged season 3 of that. And season 3 was amazing.
So leading up to the promotion of this town hall, you received a lot of excitement, and we received several questions, Secretary, about your life previous to politics. So tell us a little bit about your life as a social worker, and what was that like, and how did that lead and impact your leadership once you were elected?
Yeah, so I was working at one of the largest domestic violence shelters in the state, and we were doing a lot of advocacy work at the legislature in conjunction with the what is now the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. And any of you that do legislative advocacy know how frustrating it is. It's a very slow process, even when folks are on your side. Legislative change is very incremental. And on an issue like domestic violence, where it really should be nonpartisan, it was still really hard to make change happen. And at the time I was doing this work, a friend of my, a colleague that was working with me, was part of starting Emerge here in Arizona and encouraged me to apply. That's sort of where I figured out if you can't change policy, you have to change who's making policy.
That's right.
And so I started volunteering on a lot of different campaigns and got active with the Democratic Party, which I wouldn't even have known how to do before. So sort of Emerge really opened all the doors. But so I was always really engaged in a lot of different community activities. And when I got involved in politics, I just kind of shifted what I was engaged in. But and I have a family. I have 2 kids who are now both adults, which as we're staying more at home, I am very thankful I don't have small children at home. I'm sorry for all of you that do. So the hard thing about them being adults is you can't make them do smart things. And my son lives with roommates, and whenever he comes over here, we're all exposed to everything that his roommates are out there doing. So it's kind of hard.
I joke around with my friends that have young children, and I say overnight you were promoted to teacher, nurse, principal, and counselor, and all. And I don't know how they're doing it, so I'm right there with you. You're a superwoman. You do it all. Triathlons, elected leader, Iron Woman. I mean, you're doing it all. So let's talk about your elected life. Let's talk about the Secretary of State's office. Most people know the Secretary of State's office for elections, right? But it's such a comprehensive office. You're also the Lieutenant Governor of Arizona. So talk to us a little bit about the complexities and how diverse truly the Secretary of State's office is.
Yes. So in addition to elections, our office oversees the State Library Archives and Public Records. And one of the things I want to brag about right now that we're doing through that division of our office is the libraries in normal times are providing enhanced internet access in rural communities that are particularly underserved with internet access. And so we lend out hotspots, and we just received over a $500,000 grant through the CARES Act to increase that Wi-Fi access in rural areas, which is so important, especially right now for students who are trying to stay connected to school and learning. But anyone who's we're all using the internet a lot more to stay connected to our employment, to our families and friends. And so that's one part of that program. But obviously the program is very diverse. We manage all of the public records for the entire state. Which is statutorily required. And there's, all the laws around public record retention. That's all of our department. We also have the Address Confidentiality Program, which is a program for certain victims of certain crimes who need to apply for a substitute address to stay hidden from their offender. And so our office manages that program. There's over 700 participants, and we process all of their mail, and in addition provide some victim advocacy services through that program. And we also have business services, which includes the notary training and certification. And we were just able to ramp up and fast track getting remote notarization in place. It was authorized through the legislature last year, and we were on track to get it done by July 1st, and we were able to fast track it so that notaries could provide services now without having to have contact face-to-face with folks who need that service.
That's such an important aspect in our everyday life. Notaries, can you this is actually one of the questions we received online. Take a little bit of time to talk about the importance of a notary and how can an individual become a notary?
Well, there's an application through our website, and we're able to provide most of the services we provide right now online. And so if you are interested in becoming a notary, you could find that on our website, azsos.gov. And there's an application process, and we actually do training, and I'm not positive what the training schedule looks like right now. If we're switching to an online training, I'm not really sure about that. But folks who were carrying petitions for ballot measures. A lot of those folks end up becoming notaries so that they can notarize those petitions. But as folks are looking at medical issues and medical decisions, having those advanced directives and medical powers of attorney notarized has been something that notaries are really in demand for right now.
It's such an important aspect of our everyday life, and you know, in times like this, we often forget about some of those small actions, but it's just so incredibly important. So thank you for the work that you are doing, especially fast tracking the electronic notary process, because that's going to be so important to ensuring that folks are getting the documentation and everything needed across the finish line. So let's talk about the topic of the hour, voter registration. So tell us a little bit about what does it look like over the past few months? How have those numbers been impacted by the pandemic?
We're not seeing necessarily, I mean, so our last quarterly report was in March. And so I don't know that we've seen necessarily the direct impact that the pandemic has on registration, because at the same time that things were starting to really shift, we were encouraging folks to register for the presidential preference election that was March 17th, and that registration deadline was February 18th. So we did see quite an increase there. Arizona is now at over 4 million registered voters, and we're just continuing to see a steady increase. I don't think we'll know exactly if the pandemic has affected that until the next quarter's report. But I will say that we have done a lot of work to ramp up efforts for people to be able to register online more easily. Anyone can register on servicearizona.com if you have a state driver's license or non-operating ID. But if you don't have those, you are usually having to fill out a paper form. And that there's a lot of complications that come with that, and especially right now. And so we just launched a pilot for organizations that are doing registration. So the political parties, as well as nonprofits, nonpartisan organizations that do voter registration, to be able to have a unique URL and get folks registered online, which provides, you know, certainty definitely for that voter who's registering that they are registered when they think they are, and it reduces the processing burden on the county recorder side when all those, instead of having all those paper registration forms turned into them.
Wow. So, wow, that's incredible. That is incredible to learn about. And I think it's going to make a significant difference, especially with the nonpartisan organizations that are doing that outreach, engaging communities from all walks of life to ensure that everyone's participating in the democratic process. Thank you for your work on that. We appreciate you. Let's talk elections, if you don't mind. First off, we see as an individual, you go to the ballot box or you receive your ballot by mail and you check off your person and you send your ballot back, or you vote at the ballot box. Can you talk us through what goes in behind the scenes to get our elections up and running?
Yeah. So one of the county recorders described it as, it was one of the county election directors described it as basically setting up and launching a small business overnight. The amount of planning and preparation that goes into election day voting, counting the early voting sites that might be set up, and that's, you know, a county by county decision, but they're having to determine all of the ballot styles. So in one county, take Maricopa, how many precincts are in your district that you're running for? There's a different ballot style for every single one of those precincts. So there's thousands of them in just Maricopa County. So getting all of those set, figuring out all the polling sites, recruiting poll workers, doing poll worker training for all those polling sites. And now that is complicated by a lot of things. There's a lot of polling places that aren't necessarily going to be available because of COVID-19. There are poll workers who don't want to do that job right now because of COVID-19. And, you know, a good percentage of regular poll workers are over 65, and we want to make sure that they're protected. So we're working to support the counties by launching some innovative poll worker recruitment programs. And wherever we can step in and be helpful, we're helping in terms of securing polling locations. But the most important thing we're doing right now is working with the counties to determine what additional supplies that they're going to need that they don't normally have to get for elections. We're looking at purchasing millions of pens so that there are single-use pens available. And we don't have to worry about sanitizing pens, but and so what can we purchase as a state that will provide significant savings over the counties purchasing those things individually? And that's sort of the plan that we're working on right now, which is, you know, over and above what we normally have to do to prepare for an election.
One of the things that makes Arizona's elections very different is our comprehensive vote-by-mail system.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Speak a little bit about the permanent early voters list and the vote-by-mail system.
Yep. So I think right now, especially, I mean, voters in Arizona are lucky that we have such a robust vote-by-mail, but especially right now, it's super helpful in terms of how we're preparing for the August primary and November general election. And we sort of got a dry run through with the March presidential preference election in terms of everything that we would need to do to be prepared. But so right now, any voter in the state of Arizona can request either to be put on the permanent early voter list or to receive a one-time early ballot. And you can make both of those requests right now. Like right now, you can go to my.arizona.vote and request an early ballot for August and an early ballot for November. Or you can, there are ways to get on the permanent early voter list that require a little bit more than just that. But what we were hoping and what we would like to do, because we know that vote by mail is probably the safest option for most voters, is being able to have every county mail a ballot to every single registered voter, but that requires legislative authority, and the legislature has made it clear that they aren't going to do the right thing on this issue. And so what we are doing is moving forward and just doing everything we can to get as many people signed up for that early ballot as possible. The counties are mailing those permanent early voter list applications to every voter that's not already on it. And the counties that aren't doing that, we're going to do it for them. So every voter in the state is going to receive that option. And then we know that there are a lot of places where voting by mail is really difficult. The Navajo Nation is a perfect example of that. We're working with the county officials in those counties to make sure that we have more. We're working with the county officials and the tribal leaders as well to make sure that we have more in-person voting options, more drop boxes for people instead of having to drop that ballot in the mail. And there's also issues in terms of language accessibility and physical accessibility that sometimes in-person voting is needed. So we're working to make sure we have as many options for people as possible. And what we really are encouraging voters to do is to plan ahead, get that early ballot if you can. And if you decide not to do that, then, figure out a voting plan that's the safest for you.
That's exactly right. Make a vote plan, vote early, and do it, and bring friends along too. Make your voting plan now. Katie,
thank you for not saying vote often, because I would have to.
We can't do that. No. We did receive a few questions about all mail-in elections. Would you mind discussing, taking a step back, Secretary? You talked about the legislature and how and as a former leader in the legislature, you know all about this and the authority that would be needed to authorize all mail-in elections. Can you speak to that? Who has the ability to do so, and where does Arizona lie in that process?
So right now, if there was an election that did not include state or federal office, so in fact, today there is a jurisdictional election in Mountain Hills, I believe Douglas, I can't remember where else, but there's like 3 cities, and those are jurisdictional. And so the counties have the authority in that election to mail a ballot to every voter, to conduct that entire election by mail. And that's what is happening. So we have the ability to do that if it's not a state or federal election. But because August and November include state and federal offices, it requires legislative authority to do that. And if the legislature was inclined to do that, we're in a really good position to be able to facilitate and make sure that that happens successfully, because the counties have a good track record of doing that already. And again, I just want to emphasize, when we're talking about these all-mail elections, we are never talking about eliminating all the in-person options, because those are critical for the reasons that I've already mentioned. So I think, unfortunately, this issue of voting by mail has become hyper-partisan. And if you listen across the country, there's a lot of partisan rhetoric about vote by mail and what that entails. But when you get down to the level of the county election officials who actually administer elections, and we're talking about elected and appointed officials of every party, there really is bipartisan support. And I think this is an issue where we really should be listening to the experts. Well, there's a lot of issues where we should be listening to the experts and not the politicians. This is certainly one of them. So.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But that's why we're fortunate to have you, because you understand that. You understand that you can always learn, and you can always be innovative and creative and do what's possible to meet the needs of the people. We're going to take a pivot. We just got a question that came in online from Jay, and I'm going to tack on to that. Jay says, Secretary Hobbs, how do you plan to assist businesses in Arizona as we navigate COVID-19? I'm going to add a little bit to that, because your office is the state's portal for business. And so can you, in addition to that, can you talk a little bit about the work that your office does for businesses and some of the lesser known programs that you have in your office?
So this is actually a really confusing part of state government, because we have sort of a fourth branch, which is the Corporation Commission, and they handle most business filings. Our office handles partnership registration, and that's really the only if you're setting up a business that you would, and then trademark and trade name search and registration. So what we have done is really work to make sure that all of those services are available to folks either by calling or online, so that it minimizes them having to come into the office. And I think that what we are all learning from this, and I think it's an opportunity for all of us, is really ways that we can innovate and streamline how we provide services, either in the private sector or in government, because we're having to be really creative about how we do that now. And I think in the future, what that is going to mean is that we are just providing better services. So, in terms of the Small Business Administration loans that are coming from the federal government, and that is all being handled through the Department of Commerce and the governor's office. So unfortunately, we don't have impact over that, but we're doing what we can to provide all of the services that we provide in the most flexible manner possible. Incredible.
That's great. I mean, and for folks who are not directly in tune with everything that's happening at the state level, the various different departments and agencies and branches of government easily goes overlooked, and it becomes confusing and is very hard. So thank you for providing that clarity. We had another great question just come in online from Mr. Trevor Paxton. And I'm going to loop this back into some of the topics you were talking about earlier about access to voting. And Trevor says, as a lifelong Arizona resident, I am fully invested in seeing this state continue to support its residents, especially those less privileged and in marginalized communities, as leaders on the forefront of ensuring equity and opportunity for our youth, families, individuals with disabilities, and many others. What are you doing to ensure our most overlooked populations aren't forgotten? All right, that's a great question, Trevor. Thank you. So I would love to, Secretary, if we can talk a little bit about voting access and some of the other provisions that you've instituted within your office.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what this crisis has highlighted more than anything is the disparity that we all know already exists, right? It's just really, I think, enhancing that a lot. And so I think that, I see posts about like, oh, you can't travel. You should just think about turning your bedroom into a resort. And I'm like, what? But like, everybody's not just sitting at home buying fancy pillows on Amazon or something. So and there's so many people who don't have the choice to work at home. And if they don't go to work and they're exposing themselves to harm, that they don't have a choice about that. And they have to work because they need that paycheck. So these are things that people have to deal with all the time, and they're just definitely highlighted now. And I think what I am focused on in my elected position really is how do we make voting as accessible as possible and make sure that as many people who are eligible can participate as possible. That's how we change the direction, and how we make sure that we have a government that works for all of us, because I think it's clear right now that that's not happening.
Completely agree. And if there's one thing, like you said, that we've learned throughout this crisis, is the fact that we do not, the inequities that were there have just surfaced. And it's our job as leaders and champions to do all that we possibly can to put these issues at the forefront and fight for our most marginalized communities. So, Secretary, I want you to brag to us just for a brief moment. You've been in the legislature. You did nearly a decade in the legislature. You were the minority leader in the Senate. Talk to us a little bit. You were an advocate for advancing health access and rights of victims of sexual violence. Talk to us a little bit about your experience at the Capitol. How does that make you a more effective, efficient Secretary of State? And what are some of the accomplishments that you're most proud of? And conversely, what did you learn? What were some of the best learning lessons?
Well, I think one of the first things that I learned is that campaigning is very, very different than governing. And that's true in the legislature, and it's more true when you get to executive office. But I am always someone who tries to focus on the issue rather than the person. And so I made it a practice early on to not vilify other people, even if I vehemently disagreed with them. And I think that is how I was able to get legislation passed my first 2 years as a freshman House member. So it's going to get really loud because my daughter is upstairs above me teaching a tap class over Zoom. So sorry about that.
It's life. It's life. This is the new normal.
Right now.
This is the new normal.
So in the Senate, when I went to the Senate, my first year in the Senate was when we passed Medicaid expansion. Mm-hmm. And going into that session, our caucus was fully on board, and we were very pleasantly surprised when Governor Brewer announced that that was a priority in her State of the State address. And so we started working right away with that group of Republicans that we knew also supported it, in terms of how we could make that happen, because the leadership didn't support it, and we had to work with them so they knew that we had their backs, and that the president knew that we would roll them if they didn't allow it to come to the floor. And that required just a lot of strategizing. I wasn't in leadership at the time, but as a social worker, I think I helped bring in a lot of that perspective of why it was such a needed policy change. And I think that really, when I look back in the legislature, that was one of the most impactful things. And being a Democrat in the minority in the legislature, there wasn't a lot of things that we got to vote for that we're really proud of, and that was just one of them. The other thing was I worked to advance the issue of untested rape kits, which we had a huge backlog in Phoenix and Maricopa County. And I had a bill to try to start addressing that issue and really do an inventory and figure out why they were untested, so we could start talking about policy to try to reverse that. And really the issue there is around justice for victims of sexual violence. And my bill was ready for the Senate floor, and I had support to get it out of the Senate, and the Senate president killed it. And he never told me why. So later that year, I was talking with the governor. We were prepping for the next legislative session and talking about our caucus priorities. And this bill wasn't necessarily a caucus priority, but I mentioned it to him. And he just grabbed onto the issue and he's like, well, why wouldn't we test all the rape kits? And I said, I don't know. That's what my bill was supposed to find out. So we worked together to implement a task force. And at the end of that task force, we had policy in place that said going forward, every rape kit's going to be tested. And that task force eliminated the backlog. And now every rape kit in Arizona is tested. And that's a huge victory for victims of sexual violence. Yeah. And we also know that that process has actually helped solve cases. People who commit sexual assault usually do it more than once. And so even on seemingly unrelated cases, if you're testing all of the kits, you're able to connect dots. And that's what's happened in a lot of cases. So I'm really proud of that. And I think, that's an issue that's been really important to me throughout my career, but also just, again, highlights the fact that, because I haven't, there's a lot of things I disagree with the governor about, but because we have always had a good working relationship, when there is an issue that we can work together on, we can work together on it. And that's kind of how I've spent my whole elected official career. So
I love it. And you're getting love in the comments. Nerdy Pursuit just said, wow, amazing work, Secretary Hobbs on Twitter. And yes, but Madam Secretary, that's what you are. You're a coalition builder. You bring people together, and you're a pragmatic, thoughtful problem solver. And we're very fortunate to have you in leadership, and grateful that you are our Secretary of State. You've won numerous awards. The League of Cities and Towns have named you Legislature of the Year. You've won advocacy awards. You are recognized for the work that you're doing. I really would like, especially for the folks tuning in today, what advice would you give someone who has ambitions to influence public policy or run for office? What advice would you give them to guide them through this process?
Well, what I would say is that it's really important to, as you said, build a coalition. When I first got into office, I was elected in 2010. And if you remember back then, I don't know, you might have been in grade school, Jeff.
I remember.
That was the year of the Tea Party, and the Tea Party took over Congress. They took over a lot of state legislatures, and a lot of these folks that I was elected to serve with had never set foot at the Capitol at all, and they didn't understand how government worked, and they didn't see government as the solution, and so they came in and tried to solve problems by just eliminating government agencies or without understanding the benefits that were provided or how the program worked, or really trying to get at a real solution to the problem. And you're not gonna get there if you just go in and say, I have the answer and we have to get rid of this. You need to bring in everybody, even people that disagree with you, because that's how you really solve problems. And unfortunately, I think that doesn't happen enough. You see sides going at each other because nobody's willing to sit down at the same table, or you have people willing to sit down at the table, but the people in power don't invite them to sit at that table. And so, and I think, just the issue of education funding in our state, there's clearly a need to do more. We clearly have two sides, and we clearly have one side that's not willing to listen to the other side. And I just don't think we're ever going to solve the problem in a sustainable way if we don't change that. So I think, just really be willing to listen, and also, things can change, and the answer today might not be the answer tomorrow. And so being flexible with that as well.
That's incredible. And thank you for providing that today. This has been a 40 minutes have gone by already. You've just been remarkable, and we thank you for your time that you've been spending with us. Do you have any closing thoughts before we hop off today?
You know, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot right now is just, again, I mentioned this already, but just the opportunity that we have to change the way that we do business in the future. And I think we're seeing it now with folks running for office right now, you running for office right now. It must be such an incredibly difficult time to campaign, and you're having to implement all kinds of new ways to reach people. And I just think it's phenomenal. And I think it speaks to the kind of leadership that we're going to see out of folks who are elected in this next election, but also just the innovation that we have and the ability that we have to solve problems when we work together. And I think that really is the opportunity that we have out of all of this. You know, yes. You and I were talking earlier about, like, I just miss people. I want to connect with people again. And you know, that we're going to come through this stronger, and yeah. I think better able to really solve the issues that we need to solve.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you for that. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, we as humans, as people, we come out of every conflict stronger than we were heading into it, and this one is no different. So, Secretary Hobbs, we are grateful for your time. We know how busy you are. From the couches at home, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving Secretary Hobbs a round of applause. We appreciate you. We admire you. We love you. We're grateful for your leadership. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Ladies and gentlemen, give her a follow online. Follow her on Twitter at Secretary Hobbs. Same on Facebook. Like her content, share her content, because she is doing the right thing. She's one of the best, in my opinion, the best Secretary of State in the nation. And we're grateful to have Katie Hobbs here with us today. So thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I want to tell you all, thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate you. We have one more event coming up this week. We've been endorsed by Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and we have a town hall and fundraiser on Thursday. So be sure, look at the content online. If you like what you see, sign up. If you really like what you see, share it. We appreciate you tuning in today. As always, my door is open. Give me a call, text, email, carrier pigeon, smoke signal, whatever it takes, reach out. I'm going to be here for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate you. Until next time, have a great one.